Why small countries sometimes beat superpowers. Open a world map for a second. Your eyes immediately jump to the giants. The United States, China, Russia. Massive countries stretching across continents with huge populations, powerful militaries, and global influence. And then, scattered between them, are dozens of tiny nations that almost disappear on the map. Looking at them, you might assume they are constantly vulnerable. You might think they survive only because larger countries allow them to. But that's not what happens. In fact, some of the world's most stable, wealthy, and strategically important countries are surprisingly small. Some have survived for centuries despite being surrounded by much larger powers. Some have become economic giants without having giant territories. So how do they do it? How do small countries survive and sometimes even outperform superpowers in a world defined by global power struggles? The answer begins with a simple reality. Power isn't always about size. Throughout history, enormous empires have risen, expanded, and dominated entire regions, only to collapse and disappear. Yet, many small nations have endured through all of those changes. That's because they learned something important. They don't try to play the same game as superpowers. They don't try to dominate the world. Instead, they focus on survival. They focus on understanding the international system and finding ways to make themselves valuable within it. Over time, that strategy has proven incredibly effective. The first secret is geography, and geography matters far more than most people realize. Sometimes where a country is located matters more than how large it is. Take Singapore as an example. Singapore is tiny. Compared to most countries, it barely occupies any space on the map. Yet it sits next to the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest maritime trade routes on Earth. Every day, enormous amounts of global commerce move through these sea routes. Energy supplies, manufactured goods, raw materials and consumer products all pass through this critical choke point in trade. Singapore recognized its geographic advantage and transformed itself into a global trade center, a shipping hub, and an international logistics powerhouse. Instead of being ignored because of its size, Singapore became necessary to the global economy. Its strategic location turned it into one of the most important commercial crossroads in the world. Geography can also provide protection. Look at Switzerland. Unlike Singapore, Switzerland's strength comes from its natural defenses. The country is surrounded by the Alps mountains, creating some of the most formidable natural defense barriers in Europe. These mountain defenses made invasion difficult and expensive for centuries. Armies could enter, but controlling the territory was another challenge entirely. Switzerland's defensive geography gave it a level of geographic security that many larger countries never enjoyed. Sometimes strategic geography isn't about controlling trade routes. Sometimes it's about making conquest so costly that nobody wants to attempt it. But geography alone isn't enough. The second secret is usefulness. Some small countries survive because they make themselves valuable to everyone around them. When a country becomes important to global systems, it gains some protection through relevance. Dubai is a perfect example. Today, Dubai is known as a global business hub, an international finance center, a tourist economy, and a major aviation hub. But none of that happened by accident. Over decades, Dubai deliberately transformed itself into a center of global commerce and connectivity. It attracted foreign investment, developed world-class infrastructure, and positioned itself as a gateway between continents. The result is that Dubai became deeply integrated into global markets. And when a country or city becomes that important to international business, very few people want to destabilize it. Its economic importance becomes a source of power. This brings us to another survival strategy, balancing great powers. Some countries exist in locations where they cannot avoid geopolitical pressure. Nepal is one of them. Sitting directly between India and China, Nepal finds itself positioned between two major regional powers. That situation creates constant challenges. Both neighbors have enormous influence, and both have strategic interests in the region. Yet Nepal has managed to preserve its independence through diplomatic balancing. Rather than fully aligning with one side, Nepal maintains relationships with both. This approach gives it flexibility and reduces dependence on any single power. It's a difficult balancing act, but it demonstrates one of the most important lessons in geopolitics. Sometimes survival comes from managing relationships rather than winning conflicts. Then there is the strategy of neutrality. Some countries survive by staying out of major confrontations altogether. Switzerland is again one of the best examples. For generations, Swiss neutrality has been a cornerstone of its foreign policy. Rather than choosing sides in conflicts, Switzerland focused on stability, diplomacy, and financial services. Over time, it built a reputation as neutral ground where negotiations could take place. This reputation created value. Countries from different sides could trust Switzerland to serve as a diplomatic mediator. Its neutrality became one of its greatest assets. Instead of gaining influence through military power, Switzerland gained influence through trust and diplomatic relevance. When you look at these examples together, a pattern begins to emerge. Singapore used strategic positioning and maritime trade routes. Switzerland used natural defences, neutrality and diplomacy. Dubai used commerce, finance and global connectivity. Nepal used diplomatic balancing between neighbouring superpowers. Different countries, different circumstances, different strategies, yet all of them understood the same fundamental truth. Influence without size is possible. Power isn't always measured by territory, population or military strength. Sometimes strategic advantage matters more than sheer scale. This is why many small countries continue to thrive in a world dominated by larger powers. They focus on strategic relevance. They develop economic resilience. They create diplomatic leverage. They build soft power. They become indispensable to global systems. In other words, they make themselves too valuable, too connected, or too complicated to be easily controlled. They understand that survival in geopolitics often comes from adaptation rather than domination, and perhaps that's the biggest lesson of all. In world geopolitics, power isn't always about being the biggest player on the board. It's about understanding the rules of the game. It's about recognizing your strengths and using them effectively. The countries that survive are often the ones that find a unique role in the international system and make themselves impossible to ignore. They don't try to compete with superpowers on every level. Instead, they find areas where they can create influence far beyond their size. So the next time you look at a world map, don't just focus on the giants. Pay attention to the small countries too. Because some of the most fascinating stories in international relations come from nations that learned how to survive among powerful neighbors, how to turn geography into an advantage, how to use diplomacy as a weapon, and how to build power beyond size. They prove that in geopolitics, importance often matters more than territory, and strategy often matters more than strength. If you enjoyed this video and want more deep dives into geopolitics, international relations, global power struggles, and the hidden forces shaping our world, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.